I am Nancy Daubenberger. I'm the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Transportation and the Chair of the EQB. And so at this point, why don't we go ahead and Catherine Nuschler, Executive Director Nuschler, would you go ahead and call the roll?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think we are expecting about 10 voting members today, and I know we have a lot of proxies coming in for our conversation about the strategic plan and various other conversations, so glad to see everybody. Commissioner Arnold.
I'm here.
Board Member Bakken, I believe, could not make it today. Double checking. Okay. Board Member Bauerkemper.
Here, thanks.
I believe we have Assistant Commissioner Myra Kunis for MDH proxy.
Here.
Chair Daubenberger.
Here.
Board Member Foster.
Here.
Commissioner Gronvall. Okay, Commissioner Gronvall is apparently running late, so hopefully we will see her in a moment. Board Member Hintz.
Here.
Board Member Katzenberger.
Here.
Commissioner Kessler.
I'm here.
Board Member Martin. All right, I know Board Member Martin had to be at a legislative hearing and is hoping to join us from the halls or hopefully somewhere once he's done testifying there. I don't believe we have anyone from DEED, Commissioner Verlick or Commissioner McKinnon. Okay. Board Member Nelson is not available today. And then let's see, Commissioner Peterson is traveling. So I thought I saw Assistant Commissioner Jessup, but Steve Bruce, you're here for MDA?
Correct.
Okay. Commissioner Stroman. No, she's at MIAC, so I think Melissa Kuski, Director McCuskey. Sorry, Melissa, Director Kuski, you're here.
I'm here.
Okay. Chair Holman.
I am here.
Okay. And from Met Council, I believe we're expecting Sue Vento. Sue, are you here? All right. Well, Madam Chair, at this time we have 8 members. So that is not a quorum. I believe we will have a quorum. We have when Commissioner Gronvall gets here. She's here yet. Or Board Member Martin or Commissioner Stroman. So we will watch for those folks.
Great, thank you for calling roll. And I will note too that I'm tuning in from a little conference room at the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council meeting here at Boys Fort, and Commissioner Stroman is also here. And she let me know that for voting items, she was going to come and join me when we get close to those. So, so we will have her for that, I understand, unless she's reporting out at the moment. Of course, it's part of MIAC. All right, and so without a quorum, we will need to skip our consent agenda. And so with that, which is the approval of the minutes and the approval of the draft agenda. But why don't we just go ahead then and move on to the executive director's report, if that sounds good to you, Executive Director Nuschler?
Certainly, Madam Chair, I can do that. So thank you to everyone who was able to join us for our February meeting today. I'm really looking forward to the discussions. While we do plan to move back to having more hybrid meetings that would give us all the chance to convene in person, due to various travel schedules and for flexibility, virtual made sense for today. So thank you to everybody for rolling with that. I am hoping that maybe sometime this summer we could have lunch or something before our meeting, so we can all get together. So we'll work on that as well as a time for that. So, but I still very much appreciate everybody joining us virtually today. At this point, I am going to move to do some logistics for the meeting. A reminder that the meeting is being recorded as it shows on your screen. We do have a meeting chat that is open and visible to everybody, but as a reminder, we do not keep that as part of the record, so please use it mostly for logistics items and not for substantive comments at this point. So this is fully virtual. We will absolutely, as always, welcome questions as feedback, and particularly will encourage proxies during the facilitated conversation later to please participate. Feel free to use the raise hand function or jump in during the discussions. Our board members and proxies and tech reps should be able to mute and unmute themselves. For members of the public, we will do an opportunity for public comment at the end of the agenda today. Our first priority for that time period will be to get any comments or input on our strategic plan discussions and then any general discussions. So just a reminder on how to comment, visual reminder for those of you who need that. If our preferred method is for you to raise your hand in Teams, and when we get there, that is up at the top of your screen, the hand raise button. We will prompt you when we get to that point in the agenda to raise your hand, and we'll call on you. We do have to elevate you and allow you to unmute yourself, so it sometimes takes a little moment, so please just be patient as we work through that when we get to that point. There's often a slight lag before you can click unmute yourself. And these procedures are on page 2 of the meeting packet. So having done the logistics, moving on to just general report and announcements for today. First off, we have new staff since our last board meeting. I'm very excited to introduce you all to Steph Aho, who is joining us today. Hi, Steph. Steph joined EQB in late January, and she's going to be the main driver of our work to create the greenhouse gas emission calculator tool and the related guidance and information. Kayla has been putting a lot of this together and has been working closely to share all of that with Steph, and then Steph will be taking on as the main project leader on that one. So very happy to have her. Also, sort of in new staff, mostly important to me, but just for all of you to know, the MPCA assigns an assistant division director to various parts of the MPCA to help navigate through budget and HR items, and also assigns one to EQB to help us access and use those operational items or operational support from PCA. And so we had a new division director who will be working with, or assistant division director who will be working with EQB start today. Her name is Felicia Markson, and I'm looking forward to working with her. So like I said, probably mostly only matters to me, but it's useful to know as well. 2 other short things. The mandatory categories report, which you will hear more about in detail in over the rest of the year probably. We have launched our engagement on that in late January. We put up an engagement HQ page for general ideas from the public and others, and then a more detailed survey for those who want to be able to give us really detailed feedback on the mandatory categories. So from our webpage, you can reach both of those things, that survey and sort of engagement HQ general input comment page are open for another week, and we'd love to have input. So if there are folks that you know that want to tell us how, what kinds of projects want to go or should go through environmental review that they want to have go through environmental review, please encourage them to take a look at those. And it is posted on our website. Our website did migrate relatively successfully after our last board meeting. There was a lot of post-migration checking and updates, and I really appreciate how quickly all of the staff got through and looked at all of that and made sure all of our documents were still working or fixing them where they weren't. So hopefully everybody has been able to find the things that they need, and documents have not disappeared. We still are finding a few and fixing them. If you can't find something or something seems to be broken, please reach out to us and let us know. you can email Priscilla or me or Hazel. We will, we can sort that out. So hopefully you can find the things that you need. And so, Madam Chair, that is my report for today.
Thank you, Executive Director Nuschler. So I will check to see here. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the Executive Director's report? Not seeing any hands raised. I think we can go ahead and move on. So next on the agenda is the election of the vice chair. And Public Board Member Nelson, or excuse me, Public Board Member Nick Martin, excuse me, has been our vice chair since the early last year. It was March of 23. And I really appreciate that he's been willing to do that role and take over the chair role for me when I've been unavailable. It's been a tremendous help to have a vice chair, and Nick has filled that role very well. So, and I will mention, I don't know if Public Member Martin joined yet. I know he was going to be coming late as we heard that he was in a hearing today. I'm not seeing him on the participant list, although there is a phone number, so maybe that is him. But he did confirm with me via email this morning that he is still willing to carry on in the role of vice chair. So, but he also did mention that if there is anybody else interested, he'd be happy to give that up too. So he's willing to be elected to the role, but also we are interested to know if there are any other nominations or interest in serving in that role. I will pause to hear for any other nominations or expressions of interest. Okay, I am not hearing any. But let me just do another check here to just see if Member Martin is on. Nick, are you out there? Okay, I'm not hearing it, but again, he did confirm with me that he's good with staying on. So with that, why don't we go ahead and vote to approve of Public Board Member Martin as the vice chair. So do I have a motion for that?
So moved, Holman.
Madam Chair, we might have to wait until you see Commissioner Stroman walk in that room with you, because
Sorry about that. She's on her way.
Okay.
All right, she's here joining me now. So I think I heard a motion.
Madam Chair, Holman moves to approve or the nomination of Board Member Martin to continue in his role as vice chair.
And if you need a second, this is Katrina. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner Kessler. Any discussion? Not hearing any. All right, so I should confirm, do we have 10 voting members now?
Madam Chair, we need 9. So with Commissioner Stroman, we have 9.
Oh, great. Okay, we need 9. We've got 9 now. Perfect. Yeah. All right. So with that, why don't we call? Oh, is this a roll call vote? Or voice?
Yes, Madam Chair. Because we're virtual, we have to do everything via roll call for the record. So I will go down the line. Commissioner Arnold.
Yes.
Board Member Bakken is not present. Board Member Bauer-Kemper.
Yes.
And Commissioner Cunningham is not present. Commissioner Dobbenberger.
Yes.
Board Member Foster.
Yes.
Commissioner Gronval. Not joined us yet. Chair Holman.
Yes.
Board Member Hintz.
Yes.
Board Member Katzenberger.
Yes.
Commissioner Kessler.
Yes.
Board Member Martin. Not made it yet. Commissioner Verelek is not with us. Board Member Nelson is not with us. Commissioner Peterson is not present. Commissioner Stroman.
Aye.
All right, that is 9 ayes and no nays. So
Great. Well, thank you everyone for that. So now, why don't we go on to the next agenda item, which is the ARIS resolution. It's next on the agenda. And so Executive Director Nuschler, will you present the updated ARIS resolution?
yes, Madam Chair. So I have talked to many of you about this in going through the various records of the EQB and sort of trying to determine how ARIS was set up and what the appropriate membership was. There was some confusion because we couldn't find a signed resolution that had the exact number of attendees that we were expecting or that we should plan to have. So, and from looking at the meeting minutes or listening to the meeting recording, it did appear that the subcommittee had finally been determined to be 10 members of the board, which would be a quorum, which would be inappropriate for a subcommittee and against the rules of the rules that the board has set up for subcommittees. And so just for clarity, I would like us to pass a new resolution authorizing and clarifying the ARIS membership and procedures. And so that was included in your packet. Most of the information at the top about the charge and the authority of the board is the same, focuses on the subcommittee's role to advise the board and the chair on items related to environmental review, assess effectiveness, recommend program improvements, and provide a forum for everyone to address issues of concern related to the program. So, but what we want to clarify is that membership shall consist of no more than 8 members of the board total. That keeps it below a quorum. And maintaining the commissioners or delegates of the 4 agency members. So the Department of Commerce, the MPCA, the Department of Natural Resources, and the Department of Transportation. And then that there be 4 other members of the board drawn from the public members and from the Bowser chair, as long as the chair is not a state agency staff person. We realize that Chair Holman is an agency member of the EQB, but is a public member of Bowser. So it's a little bit of an odd position, and we wanted to clarify where it fit within the potential for membership of ARIS. So that is the recommendation, and then procedures that the non-agency members would be appointed by the chair, setting a minimum of 2 meetings of ARIS per year. I think in previous discussions it was 3 or 4, and that is what we would like to do, but that isn't always possible depending on the kinds of items that are coming up. And then the final part that's sort of more clear is that the procedure for the selection of a subcommittee chair, with the procedure being for ARIS to elect their own chair from amongst its members at their first meeting every calendar year. So that is the proposed resolution, just for clarity on the membership of ARIS. I do know from listening to the recordings of the original authorization that it was very important to folks that the numbers be balanced between the agency members and the public members. And so we've tried to retain that here. And I'm happy to take questions.
All right, thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions for ED Nuschler? All right. Well, with that, why don't we go ahead and vote to approve of this new ARIS resolution? So could I have a motion to approve the resolution?
This is Commissioner Kessler. I can make that motion.
Commissioner Kessler.
Commissioner
Second.
Arnold, I can second that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Arnold. All right, any discussion? Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and move it to votes? So Edie Nuschler, would you go ahead and call the roll vote?
Yes. Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Board Member Bakken is excused. Board Member Bauer-Kemper,
Yes.
Board Member, or Commissioner Cunningham's excused. Commissioner Daubenberger,
Yes.
Board Member Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Granville, Chair Holman. Chair Holman, did we lose you? Oh, okay. Board Member Hintz. Oh, there's Chair Holman.
Yes, on the resolution, I dropped my mouse. I didn't know it would delete me from the meeting.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry
All right,
about
well,
that.
thank you. Board Member Hintz,
Also, yes.
Board Member Katzenberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Kessler,
Yes.
Board Member Martin. I thought I saw him pop on, but. Okay, Commissioner Verlick isn't here, Board Member Nelson is not here, Board Member Peterson is not here, Commissioner Stroman.
Aye.
Thank you. And that is 9 ayes and none opposed.
Great. Well, thank you all. And just as a note, so we are planning to have the next ARIS meeting next month, and that will take the place of this EQB board meeting. So in lieu of the board meeting. And Edie Nuschler was already kind of describing this, but just to make sure I'll understand. So the ARIS has 3 public members, the board member Nelson, Bauer-Kemper, and Hintz, and they have all said they're willing to serve, which I really appreciate them willing to continue on ARIS. So I am going to continue their appointment on ARIS. And then Chair Holman also indicated his interest in being on ARIS. Chair Holman, you want to go ahead and confirm that?
Yes, I'm very willing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chair Holman. Well, so with that, I'm going to also appoint Chair Holman to ARIS. So then that brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is the Environment and Energy Report Card resolution. And so I will now be turning it over to Priscilla Watt, our Communications and Engagement Coordinator of EQB, who will present the updated Environment and Energy Report Card, which is on page 13 of your packet. So Priscilla, there you are. Welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gonna share my screen. Okay. So I want to just first off thank the board and the public for their thoughtful questions and feedback that we got during last month's board meeting. I worked very hard with staff and others to make sure that we could update the report as much as possible to reflect the questions and input that came from everyone. So I just want to thank you all again for your very thoughtful feedback. There were some general changes that we did, which were to graphs and images throughout the report for clarity and just making sure that some of those photos were from Minnesota. I know that was brought up by a few folks. The other change that I'd like to bring your attention to is on on the page 17 of the board packet for our metric on asthma. The charts on the left now have a footnote to help explain why there was a drop in asthma ER visits in 2020. Just as that change just happened because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It shows that we had this pretty significant decrease, but really that was just sort of a result of the pandemic and not necessarily any other significant shifts. So the next update is on page 19 of your packet in climate change and forests. I know we had some conversation about this section last time as well. And so one of the changes that we did was we moved the chart that is now on the bottom right. That it used to be on the top right, and I think that was causing a little bit of confusion about the overall status of the metric. And then we also updated the section that's above it to say healthy forests help mitigate climate change. So that it's just a little bit clearer overall how that information is related to the metric. The next change is on page 22 of your packet with carbon-free electricity. And again, I think we had a question regarding why there was emphasis on residential heating in the following section in the report. And so I heard back from staff, and I just wanted to share this with everyone. So part of the reason that we singled out electrification of residential heating is because, one, there's a data source that we could point to estimate it. Two, there's a policy focus and accompanying funds to help electrify residential heating using heat pumps. And then three, some of the other sectors like industrial emissions might be reduced through means other than electrification. So while commercial and industrial emissions are important, earlier conversations around this metric were focused on residential electrification, which is how the focus on residential heating came about. Excuse me. And so we can certainly revisit this metric down the road, especially since we may have additional data to look at for those sectors that we didn't have before. And then on page 24 of your packet, which is on sustainable materials management, we had a recommendation to include somewhere in the beginning what sustainable materials management is. And so now there's a section that's clarifying what we mean when we say that. And I think especially because before this section was called just recycling or waste management. So anyway, there's just a little bit more clarity about what this section is about at the beginning. So again, thank you for that feedback. And then lastly, included in the board packet is metric criteria, which starts on page 33. And so these were put together by state agencies to help determine status, trend, and define any goals that are set up for the current metrics. I know we had some questions at last month's board meeting regarding how metrics were determined. So this criteria document, I'm hoping might help answer some of those questions that you all had. And then that brings me to my last note, which is that we do plan on figuring out a way to help gather input on metrics from the board and the public to help us improve and update the next iteration of the report. And so based on discussions I've had with agency teams and staff, metrics definitely need to be sort of changed and updated based on new data, how we present the information, and just general shifts in goals from the state and or federal agencies and departments. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and see if there's any questions for me.
Thank you, Priscilla. Does anyone have any questions for Priscilla? Really appreciate all your work on this, Priscilla, and thank you, board members, too, for your review and the comments and the discussion we had last month and the questions you've raised. Excuse me one second. Okay, I have Commissioner Stroman back here with me now too. So with that, if we don't have any questions, I think we could go ahead and move to approve the Environment and Energy Report Card Resolution, which, as I mentioned, on page 11 of your packet. Take a look at that. And with that, if I could ask for a motion to approve of that resolution.
Ken Foster, I'll move to approve that resolution.
Thank you, Board Member Foster. Do I have a second?
Dan Katzenberger, I'll second.
Thank you, Member Katzenberger. All right, any discussion? Not hearing or seeing anything. So Executive Director Nussler, would you want to go ahead and call the roll vote?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Member Back is not present. Board Member Bauer-Kemper,
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham's not present. Chair Daubenberger,
Yes.
Board Member Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Grandval, Chair Holman,
Yes.
Board Member Hintz,
Yes.
Board Member Katzenberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Kessler,
Yes.
Board Member Martin,
Yes.
Commissioner Verlick is not present, or Board Member Nelson, Commissioner Peterson, Commissioner Stroman.
Aye.
All right. Madam Chair, that is 10 ayes and no other votes.
Great. Thank you all. And again, thanks for all the work on the Environment and Energy Report Card. All right, well, why don't we circle back to the front end of the meeting where we needed to approve of the minutes and the consent and the draft agenda, so the consent agenda. And now that we have a quorum, let's go ahead and do that. So can I get a motion to approve of the consent agenda?
This is Commissioner Kessler. I will make that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Kessler. May I have a second?
Second, Holman.
Thank you, Chair Holman. All right, any discussion? Right, why don't we go to the roll vote on that then?
All right, Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Board Member Bauer-Kemper,
Yes.
Chair Daubenberger,
Yes.
Board Member Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Grandval, with us, Board Member Hintz,
Yes.
Board Member Katzenberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Kessler,
Yes.
Board Member Martin.
Yes.
I'm going in a list that's in a different order, so now I'm confused myself. Commissioner Stroman
Aye.
and Chair Holman.
Yes.
All right, that was a unanimous vote. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you all. Okay, so then the next item on the agenda, we have Kim Behrens and Kari Cantarero. So management analysts at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency Organizational Improvement Unit, and they'll facilitate our discussion around the potential strategies to include in our updated EQB strategic plan. And so for this portion of the meeting, like we've done recently too, and we have these robust discussions, I will suspend Robert's Rules of Order in order to have a facilitated discussion. And so we'll include both our board members and their proxies in this discussion. So you'll not have to work through me to have comments and questions. So with that, I will then go ahead and turn it over to Kari and Kim. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Glad to be here. Glad to be back with you. Kari and I are glad to see your progress with the mission statement and priority outcomes. My name is Kim Behrens, and I am part of that long title of management analyst and organizational improvement unit, and kind of on it goes. But I'm here with Carrie Cantorero, and she's going to be helping us scribe. And what I appreciate that you describing it as a robust discussion. And now that you've just voted, and I've attached names to faces, and the voices in the room have gotten warmed up, I look forward to hearing from all of you. So let's take a minute to check in on the process of where we're at with, and Carrie, your screen isn't being shared yet. You want to pop that open. Awesome, thank you. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll look at the process of where we are. So we're about halfway through. Back in November, we worked on the mission and priority outcomes. January, you had an opportunity to review those. We're here in February, and today we're going to be working on a situational analysis and strategies. May, final draft will be coming out. And then May, June timeline, it will be available for public input with the intention of approving in July. So, so today is really all about, if we can go to the next slide, is all about where are we now in this refresh, and kind of looking at the priority outcomes, and we'll review those in a moment. But let's kind of look at the current state and complete a situational analysis, not unlike a SWOT analysis, if you're familiar with that. Whoops. And go back a slide. And then part 2 is brainstorming strategies for each priority outcome. So the strategies are, what's the work that we need to do, and where do we need to focus our energies as we create this roadmap forward. So today is going to be a little bit different than last time. We worked in breakout rooms last time, which was kind of a nice luxury to have. But this, because the conversation is so important, we're going to stay together and be working as a large group. And your input and participation is really key here. And this is really the last chance to get your ideas on the table before we lock in a direction. So diverse perspectives are welcome and encouraged, and we'll go to the next slide with kind of some reminders for, so like Chair Dobbenberger pointed out, Robert's rules are suspended for the workshop. I know last time when I started using your first names after hearing the formality of Robert's rules, I hope that wasn't uncomfortable for folks, and that I can continue to do that today. And as normal in your meetings, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking, but I hope you're doing a lot of unmuting. We'll use the raise hand tool to contribute. We won't be using the chat today unless it's for logistics. And then again, you can kind of hear my call for diverse perspectives and really hearing from you. So please share yours. So any questions before we get started into the content, into the situation analysis about process, or how we're going to spend our time for the remainder of your meeting? Everyone clear? Maybe a thumbs up. Perfect. Thumbs up, or in the using the reactions. I appreciate that. Thanks very much. All right. So let's move into it. And again, thank you for welcoming us into your time. So situational analysis, let's jump in and go to the next slide. I want to just kind of show you what you've accomplished so far. And we're kind of at a one-pager. Now we need communications polish on this, but we've got the words, we've got your vision, healthy and sustainable environmental quality that equitably supports public health, economic vitality, societal quality of life, and sustained natural resources. You've got your mission that you've agreed on to move forward with, to support Minnesotans in making informed decisions that protect and enhance the state's environmental quality. You've done good work on clarifying your values around collaboration, engagement, equity, and trust, and really getting down to those priority outcomes. And you were able to reduce it from last year, which was part of the idea in this refresh of how can we focus and be really clear on what we're going to go after, and really adding in that ensuring equity is an important piece, an important outcome or result of the work. So we've got convening meaningful conversations, supporting policy development, maintaining environmental review, and then that important ensuring equity. So this first part, we're going to be focusing on those 4 priority outcomes when we look at kind of what's the situation and what's the current state. So Kara, if you want to go to the next slide. The goal of this situational analysis is really to step back and identify internal, you'll see on the left side, and external factors that will impact the success and our ability to reach our outcomes. So internally, what do we need to be aware of? And externally, what do we need to be ready for? So next slide just lists the questions that I'm going to be asking, and I just want you to see them before they go away and we go to idea generation and Carrie starts populating the slide. But strengths, where do we have real advantages and momentum? What have we built that we don't want to lose going forward? And then weaknesses, what are the areas that need development? What are gaps in effectiveness and what are the major organizational issues? And then looking externally to opportunities, what forces are working for us? What doors are open to us? And really key, or what ideas whose time has come. And then lastly, threats, what could blow up if not dealt with? And what are potential dangers in the future? So those are the questions for the situation analysis. We're going to start with strengths. And I've got in the upper left-hand corner the four priority outcomes. So meaningful conversations, policy development, environmental review, and equity. And that's what I want you to hold in mind as we walk through this analysis. So Carrie, why don't we go to the next slide and start with strengths and asking that question of where do we have real advantages and momentum? And who would like to get the momentum started by going first and offering the first idea? Where does EQB have real advantage and momentum in relative to these 4 outcomes? And if you want to raise your hand, be happy to call on you. And can everyone see the screen okay? Okay. And Nancy, you have your hand up. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Well, and yes, I can see the screen just fine. I'm thinking with the 4 items that you have there, this is maybe more specific to the environmental review, but I think a strength is the updated worksheet that we worked very hard on. Might eke a little bit into opportunities. We can touch on that later, but some more clarification, work on our greenhouse gas calculator, that's coming up. But I do see that as a strength. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Katrina, go ahead.
Yeah, so just for other people, I couldn't see it until I pushed the pop out button. So if you're having a hard time seeing the little text, I will make it bigger by doing that. And then in the strength category, I think convening meaningful conversations, one of the things that EQB brings that others don't is that it has a mix of public members and appointed board members. So you have a forum that brings both public voices and government together that I don't think is available elsewhere.
Great. Thank you. What other strengths? What other real advantages does this group have going for it as we move this strategic plan forward? Or you may be thinking about, what do you not want to lose in this plan as we go forward? What do you want to make sure that we hang on to? Ken Foster, go ahead.
I would just say another strength more general is just we have a lot of experience with environmental review. So a long record of working on that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. Melissa Kuski.
I would just, add on to what was just said is experience with environmental review in a highly technically capable and experienced set of tech reps and staff that oversee it.
Excellent. All right.
I would just add, this is Todd,
Yeah.
access to existing and the best available science and research.
Yes. Thanks, Carrie, for keeping up. Doing great. Let's try for one more. Either something that we don't want to lose or where we have real advantage and momentum. What are we really known for? What do people come to us for? Go ahead, Catherine.
As I kind of promised to help make sure the conversation kept going. I feel a lot of momentum around environmental review improvement, both within and outside the organization, and the continuous improvement project that we worked on and moving that forward.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Catherine. All right, let's move into the next quadrant of weaknesses. And these are areas that need development or where there may be gaps. So what are areas that need development? What are some ideas? Yeah, Katrina, go ahead.
Well, I think in the bucket of ensuring equity, and I think this is true for all like what government or quasi-government entities at this point, that we have an opportunity to bring more diverse voices into the conversation. If you look around the virtual room, we're not very reflective of the population of the state of Minnesota. And that is a weakness in our work to support policy or have rigorous environmental review and promote meaningful conversations.
Right. Thank you. Other opportunities or areas that need development.
Kim, do you want opportunities or weaknesses now?
Well, let's stick with weaknesses. We'll get to opportunities in a minute.
I have one that I think I'm gonna classify it as an opportunity.
Okay.
And then yeah, to be clear then, like it says opportunity, and maybe that's the words that I use, but I think the weakness is that we do not reflect the diverse voices in Minnesota.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks for the clarification. Are there any major organizational issues that the EQB needs to look at? Yeah, Melissa Kuski, go ahead.
I guess what I would offer is kind of both in the meaningful conversations and ensuring equity is just kind of the structures, the laws and rules typically under which we operate weren't necessarily. They were crafted with the desire to do good, but not necessarily to address an equity lens.
Okay.
And so I think the sort of system of laws under which we operate are not well crafted for equity. So operating within those is going to be a challenge.
For sure. All right, thanks. Grace Arnold.
I think that supporting policy development, I know we had a lot of conversation about that being an area. I think that is an opportunity when we had the discussions, but I don't think that that's one that the EQB is currently doing a ton of. I don't know whether that, like, not doing it is a weakness or not. But that is probably a space for figuring out what that means and then doing it.
So kind of supporting policy development, more of start doing, but there's room for growth in that area.
Yeah, and I guess, like, there's like the pollinator plan, and there's some of those spaces that I think like when it's happening, I think it's going very well, but I think I'm a little bit reflecting the discussion we had when we were talking about the strategic plan, where this was an area where I think people had identified as a space where EQB could be doing more or doing work differently. So whether we put it as an opportunity or a threat or a weakness.
Yeah. So weakness maybe where we're not doing it as well, and an opportunity to expand on where we are doing it well. Okay. All right. With that, let's segue up to opportunities. Thanks, Carrie. So what forces are working for us? Nancy.
Thanks. I segued into this a little bit and kind of building off of what Grace was just talking about. But when it comes to environmental review, I mentioned, I think the updated form worksheet is our strength, but I understand agencies are grappling with some of the questions, especially around resiliency and mitigation. And so the opportunity to kind of better build that out or resource support in those areas. So people understand what we're looking for, when we are working through those things, I think would be good. So maybe there's a weakness there too within that, but I see it more as an opportunity.
Sure.
Could you repeat what the resources were in for that one, please?
The resource, I guess, the questions as part of working through the worksheet on where we need to address resiliency and the mitigation. And I think we're in a space right now, this is kind of more general to an opportunity, but where we're seeing the effects of climate change. And so this is really important and an opportunity we have right now to do well in this space, better build that out.
Great. Thank you. Grace Arnold, go ahead.
I think the opportunity to engage with the public in different ways is a big one. I've heard that, I think, mentioned a number of times as we've gone through these conversations. And they're just like, there are different technologies, there are different ways of doing outreach that I think, to the point earlier, we have these kind of structures that are, they're somewhat bureaucratic, and that's fine because we're a bureaucracy and that's what we do. But there are ways to meet people where they are, which is not the bureaucracy, most of the time, and help understand how that can be kind of a conversation between the public and the EQB.
So let's add to that one, meet people where they are, engage with the public in different ways and meet people where they are. and the technologies that are necessary to do that. Katrina
Yeah,
Kessler, go ahead.
I think the opportunity is like that there are tons of innovative ways to do outreach, like PCA has done, DNR. I mean, like our agencies, the organizations that people work at. And so I think the opportunity is in the mechanism.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Katrina.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to figure out where we are in this SWOT analysis. Which quadrant are we're doing?
We're in
opportunities?
opportunities. What forces are working for us?
Because I think kind of building off what others have said, you know, some of the, if you look at the report card and we're talking about air quality and climate and, you know, equity, and others have highlighted that the laws that we operate in, well, they may be well intended, they don't have those values embedded in them. So we're having to stretch the legal framework that we do work in. And I think one opportunity around engagement and kind of aligning with those areas where we are trying to do more is to bring in more youth voices and more tribal voices into the conversations, because we have seen, I mean, this is evident everywhere that youth and tribes are leading in a lot of the work where we are trying to make progress. And so I think the public platform of EQB could be enhanced by including more of that.
Excellent. Right. Thank you. Yeah, good things happening there. Ken Foster, or I'm sorry, Susan Vento was next. Ken, and then you're after Susan. And we just need you to unmute and then you're good to go.
So Kim, this is Catherine. Susan has had tech issues and we are trying to get through them.
Okay.
So Susan, I'm hoping you have an unmute somewhere in your Teams. Sometimes it says you can't unmute yourself, but you really can. Well, maybe
why don't we
I know we can come back, or I know we said not to use the chat except for logistical issues, but Susan, if you have something you want to put in the chat, we can read it in.
Okay, let's circle back. Let's circle back that way. Okay, then we'll go to Ken Foster, then we'll go to Nick Martin. So go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I think there might be an opportunity to ensure that the public fully understands the environmental review process. Some questions that were raised from people in Duluth this year kind of help clarify some things. So that could be an opportunity for EQB to produce some information that where there's environmental review being considered in different localities, that could be made available.
Okay, great. Thank you. Go ahead, Nick Martin.
Yeah, I think we have an opportunity to keep providing more tools and guidance that make the environmental review process sort of smoother, and both for project proposers and for RGUs. So the climate calculator is an obvious example of this, but there may be additional opportunities in other parts of the environmental review process too.
Great, thank you. All right. Let's move to the final quadrant on threats and talk about what forces are working against us. And if not that, what could blow up if not dealt with? Let's go Katrina Kessler and then Melissa Kuski.
So just because this is something I read this morning, Minnesota Chamber of Commerce put out, the Chamber of Commerce Foundation put out this week a report on permitting timeliness and efficiency in Minnesota and the economic impact of slow environmental permitting processes, and specifically calls out environmental review as one area where we have, in at least the view of the Chamber of Commerce Foundation, lost economic opportunities for the state of Minnesota because things take too long. And, you know, this is something we're digesting and looking, there's a lot of things called out that are within the purview of the MPCA too. But I think the perception that environmental review and the time it takes to go through these processes is hindering the state's economic advantage, which is, or economic opportunities, is out there and has the potential to be a challenge, or what is the quadrant called that we're in?
Threats.
A threat. It has a challenge to be a threat.
Yeah. And I just want to, Carrie, I just want to make one thing. I think it was hinders, not prohibits. All right. Thanks. All right, then we'll go to Melissa.
It possibly semi-related, but I think just in general, I think with the benefit of all the, you know, the broader engagement tools, I think we see it's much easier to communicate in society, but we're also seeing like a much more polarized society. And I think sometimes even on issues that would presumably benefit all Minnesotans, there's always a danger of polarization sort of derailing mutually beneficial conversations and policy development and everything. So I think it's just losing kind of control of some of these outcomes to just kind of increase societal polarization.
Sure. Okay. Glad to see the board lighting up here. Let's go to Riley. And is it Hintz or Heinz? Hintz?
Yeah, hints. Yep.
All right, thanks.
This is, bear with me here, but I think the threat overall just like is time, how quickly things are moving or not moving, and the ability to provide accountability and transparency and also respond to issues that sometimes need expediting. And so this could be an opportunity also if we want to frame it differently, but I think there is, whether it's for economic purposes or just like the, you know, slog of bureaucracy, people want things to happen faster. And we do have the technology available to expedite some processes, but you still have to go through it. And so the threat is sort of like this pressure of time sensitivity, but then there's the additional threat of like, if we don't do this work, there are tipping points that we can't come back from. So it's sort of that economic pressure, but then there's also this like, you know, how quickly do we need, I guess the whole point of this, and maybe the clearer part is going back to an opportunity, is like, can we create some sort of parallel track for expediting issues when there is a clear need for it? And is that something we would want to consider? And maybe it's already integrated into some of these, but that just seems to have come up a lot this year, is like, how does the public have power? And then when they want to have power and they're excited about an issue, we all get disenfranchised because it's like, well, we have to go through this process. This is the process. And if you can't participate for whatever reason, then you just aren't part of it. So I think just thinking about the time piece and how we do things correctly, and also be respectful of the time that people are participating in whatever area.
Okay. Thank you. So we've got time, how quickly things are moving or not moving, provide accountability, transparency. Do you want to say into processes? Does that capture? Just want to make sure that we've got the gist of your thought.
Yeah, I think into process, like
Okay,
into time sensitive processes.
into time sensitive processes. Great. Okay. Thank you for clarifying or stepping back and so we can clarify that. All right. So let's go to Todd Holman. Oh, you're on mute, Todd.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Time is being called out here as a potential threat. I was just going to suggest that agency capacity and prioritization might also be a threat. In a former life, I was in community development, and so really dependent as local governments on the expertise, the science, the overview, the agency contributions that typically came from area staff resources through the agencies, depending on, could be a DNR Hydro, it could be somebody like that. But difficult getting those technical inputs to the environmental review process was always foremost in my experience. Maybe that has changed, but I chalk it up to there's just so much on the plate of the area person, that environmental review is a piece of what they do. I bring it up as a potential threat because if there isn't sensitivity or capacity to deliver that to the local government, which is making these determinations on environmental assessment or environmental review, that's a really big deal. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And Catherine Nuschler.
Thank you. And I'm actually reading this on behalf of Susan Vento, so we get her thoughts, and it's circling back to opportunities. But I think it's a sort of a nice opposite side of kind of what Todd was just saying. So Susan says we have an invaluable opportunity in our schools, colleges, and universities. So many are taking a deep dive into environmental education and sustainability, and the students are our future environmentalists and decision makers. So engaging with them and faculty in the systems is an opportunity.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for getting that to Catherine so we can include it. All right. Well, let's conclude the situational analysis there, kind of getting a feel for what's the current state, what's important to us, what are opportunities as we go forward, threats and weaknesses. So thank you for your contributions in that conversation. If there are no additional comments that it's like, wait, I have one more to any one of the quadrants, we can certainly visit that. I see a hand go up. Otherwise, let's move into strategies. So next page, Carrie, thank you. So we're going to be brainstorming on what we are best positioned to do right now to move our priority outcomes forward. So I'd like you to think about what can we, and we're looking down now at strategies, kind of the last piece of this strategic plan refresh. What can we finish? What can we complete, build on? That these strategies, along with the outcomes, mission, and vision, provide a map of where the EQB is headed. So it's not a list of things to do, but what is it? And Katrina, I'm going to borrow some of your words from when you talked about the MPCA strategic plan of where can we focus, or what do we need to focus on and elevate what needs our attention? So where can we focus and elevate the work and activities that are really going to help move us forward? So we're in map making mode. When we get down, and Catherine, you can jump in here, when we get down to that next level of work planning, that's when we'll get in tasks and timelines and specific work, but we're still kind of thinking broadly here of how do we bring convening meaningful conversations forward? How do we build on supporting policy development? How do we sustain the awesome work that's happening in environmental review and ensuring equity across all things that the EQB does? So our outcomes are really long-term goals, and the strategies are the work we must do, the work we need to elevate and focus on. So if we go to the next slide, and this will take the bulk of our meeting. So I really appreciate the participation and the contributions in the situation analysis, and hope that I continue to see kind of the board light up and hearing from those who haven't spoken yet. But what we're going to do is first we're going to describe the current reality specifically for that outcome. Then we're going to talk about success indicators. So how will we know that we reached our goal? And then third, we're going to define the strategies. So that's going to look like this. So we'll go to the next slide, and this is a little bit busy, but we're kind of doing a 1, 2, 3 punch. So we're going to start with current reality and what are we doing well and what needs improvement relative to that priority outcome. Then we're going to say, we're going to ask what will be different in 2 to 3 years if we really mobilize behind this priority outcome. And then by doing that, we have current reality and we have success indicators. And then what we have in the middle is a gap. And that's where the strategies come in. So I'll be asking, what are we doing well in this arena that we need to do more of in the next 12 plus months to move towards this priority outcome? And Katrina, if you couldn't see the other words, these words are like tiny now on the screen, but I've got some verbs listed. So when you think of strategies, I want you to think of things like address, advance. What do we need to build? Who do we need to convene? What do we need to develop? What do we want to increase? What do we want to retain? Where do we need to reduce? Prevent, evaluate. So really those action verbs of doing. And this is really about going from good to great. EQB is doing a tremendous amount of excellent work, and we heard it through talking about environmental review and so on. But this now is the work that's needed to close the gap, and having strategies that help inform how decisions happen. So things that we need in this moment to get closer to our long-term goals. So are there any questions about how this is structured? Again, I'm going to lead you through each piece here with some kind of homing in questions, and we're going to fill it out together. We've got 4 of them to do. If you need to move around or get up, please make yourself comfortable. Joseph, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. With my apologies, I'm afraid I need a bit of help getting oriented. So
okay.
How does this conversation relate to what we have in the packet, the draft plan with the listed strategies that are there?
That's a great question. Carrie, let's go to the next slide. I think it may be 2 slides. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes per outcome. So we've got 4 priority outcomes. So on here you can see outcome number 1, the EQB fosters meaningful conversations around environmental issues. So that's one priority outcome or result that the team discussed and wants to create some forward movement around. And then Carrie, if you go to the next slide, then we've got the second one. The EQB supports innovative state policy development. We've got the third one. The EQB maintains and improves Minnesota's environmental review program. And then the fourth one, the EQB works towards achieving environmental quality without disproportionate impacts. So we're going to unpack each one of these and talk about what's the current reality around achieving environmental quality without disproportionate impacts. Then we're going to talk about how would we know that we're doing well or that we've made progress on that. And then we're going to define strategies. And Catherine provided some ideas about some of the work that might be done around that. And I can, and you can refer to those as well to help your thinking. Does that answer your question? Does that help you orient better?
I think partially. So the strategies that are listed in the packet for each of these outcomes, are they old and we're trying to move away from them, or are they things that are relevant, or did this process already happen previously?
Yeah, Catherine, can you speak to that?
Sure. And, I guess maybe it wasn't the clearest way to lay out the document. Now that I'm looking at it again, I think, as Kim said, what I tried to put in the document was sort of, here's like ideas of areas of work. And so supports innovative state policy development. The piece in your packet says, well, provide data, information, and reports. Well, that's an area of work. So as why it says examples, areas of work will be replaced by strategy. But it's not at this point a strategy, right? I wanted to give you all a space to talk about it. So I was trying not to make a specific strategy that might be more, more directive, more shaping the ideas of, maybe in the area of meaningful conversations, there's 10 different things we could do, but the strategy would point us towards a few more specific things. So that part that says, what are we going to do? Examples, areas of work will be replaced by strategies was just intended to give you all some sense of the kind of work that I think fits in that space, but not to put forward definitive strategies, because that's what we want to have the brainstorm discussion about. And they would slot in the overall document kind of in that space and replace those, what are we going to do? But I thought it was helpful to kind of put the work in those groupings. But I can see how it was confusing.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think some of these are good, maybe not concrete enough perhaps for this exercise, though. Well, I guess I don't really know that, but I think that if it's efficient or helpful, we might look at the packet to see some of the strategies that are, or example areas of work that are already under consideration.
Yeah, that sounds great, and really appreciate the clarifying question. So let's give this a try, and let's move to the first one. And so this outcome is the EQB fosters meaningful conversations around environmental issues. So what's the current reality for this result today? So what do we do well and what do we not do well? So Catherine, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I wanted to make one more clarifying statement based on some questions that I know Joseph and Nick raised last time that we talked. Is I think Kim's kind of said this, but just to be clear, the idea that I have is that the outcomes will be very sort of forever goals. Like they are the things we are striving to do, and the things that we will eventually sort of measure ourselves on will be these strategies. So I know we had some discussion too about how are we going to know how well we're doing. And so the strategies, I think, are those things that we will be measuring on. So sorry, I thought that might be an important clarification given our discussion last time.
Thanks, Catherine. All right. Then let's go to Nick Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So on this first one, I'm sort of thinking, if I understood Catherine's sort of how she set this up for us, when I think about equity in the first one and the fourth one, this first outcome is really about how inclusive are the processes, right? Like who's involved in decisions, who's involved in the dialogue. Whereas the fourth outcome that talks about reducing disproportionate impacts, that's sort of like, what are people actually experiencing? So for example, who's making the decisions about things that cause air quality versus how do we get toward this thing that's, reducing this thing that's shown on one of the energy environment report card sheets where like, the rate at which poorer people and communities of color are exposed to asthma is higher than the average Minnesotans, right? So in this first outcome, if we set aside the outcomes we're trying to get to, but we're just talking about the process or the inclusivity of the process, I think that that EQB does a great job at like engaging the public and bringing together public board members and commissioners, having a variety of venues where the public can participate and be heard, and through that process does a pretty good job of kind of balancing environmental considerations, economic considerations, trying to have a robust, processes that protect the environment and so on. So that I think we do really well. And then on the other side of the coin, just to be totally blunt, if I just think about the current reality, I think that we're if you look at the board, if you look at the people that are participating, that are regular participants in our process, they're mostly, middle class, white, middle-aged professionals. Like we have a process that really pretty effectively engages those types of Minnesotans, and you don't see like a lot of people of color either on the board or necessarily participating on our processes. You probably don't see as many youth as we would like, or tribal representatives, like was said earlier. So like that's the current reality, I think. I mean, I'm probably, we would all say that's the current reality. I'm not speaking for anyone else, but it appears that to me. So I think that, if we, moving over to the success indicators, if it were a few years from now, you would see a more diverse board, the board itself. And that obviously that'll depend on who's commissioners and which public members are selected. And then also you'd see more diverse voices that are like participating in our meetings. And maybe that means like not only having meetings, in the afternoon where people who have a salary can like call in. I mean, that's kind of why we always hear from the same people to some extent, right? I'm not to discount, we hear from it's great to hear those perspectives, but like we could certainly broaden that. So I think that I think it could look different, both who's in these meetings and what parts of the public are whether it's dialing in or participating in meetings in other ways. So I do think, to make that reality in a few years, like, and Catherine has already suggested some great ideas, we have to keep thinking about like, what do we do for engagement besides, once a month public board meetings from 1 to 4 p.m. on Wednesdays,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of great ideas that are potential there.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much for that contribution. And I just want to add, Carrie, lack of diversity on board and in participants. I think I heard you say that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, great. Thanks for getting us started. Dan Katzenberg, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Nick was saying about the times of the meetings and the way we meet. Because I do a lot of work with other diverse communities, and it is, people that work hourly jobs, people that have to do childcare, people that have to get their kids to and from school. They have different challenges. They're not able to attend a meeting like this. Technology requirements, we use Teams. Teams is a pretty out there technology. Most people don't use Teams in their daily life, so I mean, is the technology that the board is choosing to use to communicate with each other in public forums, is it accessible to folks based on the technology they have, based on the internet connections they have, based on their homes and their home environments, and how they're able to communicate in a public setting from their home? Are they comfortable doing that? So I do think all of that in terms of bringing in extra voices kind of needs to be considered. How do we make it welcoming to folks that I don't want to say they don't feel welcome, but they're not showing up, so they're not participating for one reason or another. So
right. Thank you. Great feedback. So let's jump over, kind of given that current reality, what else fits in success indicators? So more diverse board, more diverse voices participating in meetings. What else? If you really mobilized behind this, what would be different? Anything different from what's here? I'll just give a moment.
So I think like the metrics, like indicators to me is like, okay, you can point to some action and then there is an outcome. And I think having more diverse voices is great. Like that could be part of the action, but what is the outcome from that? And I think in order to truly move on meaningful conversations that get to equity and build trust where there is no trust or little trust right now, you need to be able to show how you incorporated diverse input and voices into policy, into environmental review decisions. So I don't know, maybe that's a different slide, but I think.
No, I think you're right on.
To me, it's not just having the conversation and listening. You have to say, okay, well, this is the action that I'm taking based on your input. And here is how we will measure whether or not you feel like my action was reflective of your voice.
Okay, thank you. Let's go, Nancy Daubenberger.
Thanks. I think board member Hinz had her hand up first, though.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Riley.
Thanks, Nancy. That's okay. Yeah, I was thinking from Katrina's comment, it just sparked like, I agree that we should build something that's outcomes based and have that as part of the discussion and the planning. The other thing that struck me is like, we're so far from where we need to be in many ways that us as a group trying to figure out what those outcomes should be might not even be that right group. And so there's this like initial first step that maybe is less, like maybe it's the outcome is just getting those voices at the table. That's like step one. And could you imagine if we held an EQB meeting like rotating in a school and kids could just participate or watch, even just learning by watching our process so that they feel like they're motivated to engage with us. I think it's intimidating to call in to a meeting, even if you have time available, because it's like, speaking the language, understanding the process is, Robert's Rules of Order is not something that most like high school students know what that is. So just throwing out like, is there something we could kind of like jumpstart the process?
I think that's a great segue. But first, before we segue, I want to give Nancy the floor back on. Did you have something to add on success indicators?
Actually, I think Katrina and Riley both captured it. But when I think about what's the indicator here, something that comes to my mind is, are there perspectives that we haven't heard yet or aren't on the forefront of what we typically hear that are brought to the table? And that's not maybe so much on metric, but not sure how we'd measure that. But I like what Riley said too, that these are the voices that could maybe help us shape a metric in this area too, if we're hearing those different perspectives.
Yeah. So go ahead, Dan Katzenberg. Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah, I just wanted to add too, we're talking right now a lot about equity and in terms of marginalized communities. In the conversation earlier today, we talked a little bit about like Chamber of Commerce and their kind of concerns that are happening. So I think as we're talking about having these meaningful conversations, we should also include diverse voices in terms of diverse kind of leanings in terms of how they view environmental processes.
Great. Thank you. All right, so let's move to strategies and looking at the current reality and these success indicators and where the conversation is going. And kind of Riley, to your thing of like, what's the step one we need to take? So what do you need to do more of in the next, thinking like the next year out of what could you do to move towards this outcome? So what are strategies or steps to take to move in this direction? Katrina, go ahead.
So one of the things that we have done in some of the rulemaking efforts that we have underway in the last 6 months is when we know that we need to have more diverse voices and different people than the usual suspects to show up, we are intentionally asking community groups to help us in the planning of events and say, where is community already going to be? Can we come be there with you and listen and then share information? And so it's just a reframing, like taking advantage of community connectors. If we want to show up in community and have more diverse voices, who are the people that we can reach out to strategically as a strategy to help facilitate bringing more people in?
Okay. So let's show up our communities already ready to be and who are the what did you call them? Connectors. Who are the community connectors?
Community connectors. Because it's, I mean, you could put something out on social media and saying the EQB is showing up here, and you might get no one, or you might get some people. But if you say, we're going to go to Duluth and we're going to intentionally ask the trusted community voices to help us bring others in, and then they help plan, facilitate, invite people, you're going to be much more successful.
Great. Thank you. Let's go to Grace Arnold.
I did not mean to raise my hand. That was too much clicking while I was trying to move my screens around. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
Oh, well, one thing we could survey, I think like surveying the agencies to do, like all of the agencies and organizations that your board members work at have done some amount of revamping their outreach practices, as Commissioner Kessler said. I think just like calling the best practices from those would be a good very first step.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. What else fits here as we take a few more minutes in this on this outcome? Any voices who haven't been heard that have an idea on strategy? So we've got asking community groups, finding those community connectors, surveying agencies on their outreach practices, knowing that they've been doing some tweaking of their own that we could learn from. Okay, are you ready to move to the next outcome? Thumbs up. All right, let's go to the second one. Thank you. I know this is tough work to sit and participate when we're not moving around, but appreciate everyone's flexibility and hanging in. Okay, so next we go to the EQB supports innovative state policy development on priority and emerging environmental issues. Current priority issues include climate, water, and biodiversity. And then I just want to call your attention to the values too that we have listed on these to keep in mind, the values of collaboration, engagement, equity, and trust. So let's look at the current reality for this priority outcome. So what do we do well in this space today around policy development? And I know that came up earlier as an opportunity, but what are we doing well in the space? What do we do less well?
Can I just ask maybe Catherine a question? Like
Yeah.
what does this mean in this in this, or maybe you guys can help, like supports innovative state policy development? Does that mean laws that are being passed are referencing EQB documents and actions and data? Just that, I think that would be helpful. Because innovative state policy development to me is like state policy development, like things that become law. That, and is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say somewhat that, but also, I mean, policy and program development, I think sort of similar. And this is similar to something that's in the current strategic plan. And I think I tweaked the language a little bit because we talked about kind of the limited space that EQB has to really make policy, because that happens often at individual agencies. And so the idea here is that like maybe EQB would coordinate sharing of information around key priorities and emerging issues, that we facilitate interagency coordination so that policy and programs are kind of aligned, going towards the public health and environmental protection goals, and then the forum for sharing information. And so I think really thinking in this area, you know, the interagency pollinator protection team works together and they share information, and that helps support the individual agencies making programs and policy and decisions about pollinators. You know, the water plan has maybe a similar role there, that, you know, EQB has this role to put together the big picture, and then how do we use that role to align with the policy, the programmatic and policy decisions that others are making. So maybe the role program should, or the word program should go in there in that outcome and not just policy. But that's kind of what I had in mind.
Thanks, Catherine. Does that answer your question, Katrina?
Yeah. And I mean, I think this one is hard. I would, just to get it started, I'll say, you know, the current reality, and I'll speak to water. You know, there's a lot of agencies that work in the water space, and take it or leave it, people love that or they don't. And I think that the current reality is that the EQB offers a convening forum for the public and others to see how it's all connected. And I think sometimes we do that well and sometimes we don't.
And when
and that plays out in the public critiques that people give on this topic.
And when you say how it's all connected, you mean how
Well,
like
so,
water is handled?
For example, we've got ag, we've got health, we've got DNR, we've got PCA. All of those entities are regular, they have authorities around water intentionally, whether they're state or federal delegated authorities or directed authorities from the lawmakers. We each play a different role. And people don't necessarily like the fact that all of that happens in those different agencies, that it's not all happening in one space. So the current reality is that the EQB is one of the common threads where all of this water work is connected in a public facing way.
Okay. Thank you. Nancy, go ahead.
Thanks. You know, and I wanted to just lift up something Catherine was talking about, and Katrina was alluding to too, but the state water plan and interagency pollinator protection team are really good examples of bringing the agencies together on these issues. And you know, it sounds like from how Catherine explained this one, we're talking policies with a big P or policies with a small p, right? And programs, processes, that sort of thing. But those are two good examples. So for current state, I think we do have some good examples, but well, and I'll even mention too, the climate action framework is another part of what the state of Minnesota has in place here where there's good agency coordination. But can we be doing more, taking a deeper dive into some of these areas, I think is where we need to be thinking with this particular area here.
Okay. All right, who sees something different in this current reality? Anything else from your perspective of what we do well or what we don't do well to add to what's here? Todd Holman, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
Out of practice.
Yeah.
I've been troubled trying to, think about some of the current reality and the strategy before this one. Some of those kind of roll over here, and I'm really
Sure.
sensitive to the accessibility. Yeah, the outstate, the greater Minnesota voice in these matters, and kind of the time of day, the technologies, those things are all roadblocks to people participating on the policy and program development too. Those threads kind of cut across
Sure.
participation and voices. And so things that Northwest Minnesota is concerned about is harder to hear, because that's just a geographic space that has technology issues, but it also has, it's a 5-6 hour drive. So those are, it seems to me, in the current reality that the structure of EQB and the way we take in information on policy development is really in St. Paul and taking advantage of where the hub of our government is, our agency government is. But we really need to find ways to kind of move about. And I've always appreciated DNR, PCA, other agencies have kind of gone around the state for listening sessions. I haven't been with EQB long enough to know if we do that, but I think that's a wonderful practice, so that, if the current is we don't do that, a desired future would be that we find ways to kind of go to where the people are and look through the lens of equity, because I don't think our 4410 rules that trigger EAWs and environmental review were developed in a time when we thought about cultural impact and equity across the board. We didn't look through that lens. And so I hope somewhere in here, and I hope others can help me articulate this better, that we build in that internal review of what we do and how we do it to add that lens of equity in all 4 of these strategy pillars that we're considering. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Todd. All right. So let's jump over to success indicators and start talking about what will be different in 2 to 3 years if EQB really mobilizes behind this priority outcome of innovative state policy and program development. So we know that it's about making connections. It's all of these agencies coming together. So what would be different? And is anyone better off? And that's kind of another way of asking it. Is anyone better off if there's for the movement around this, taking action around this? Yeah, it seems like this one is a little tougher to get our heads around. Yeah, Nancy, go ahead.
Sure. Well, at just jumping in with, maybe this is obvious sorts of responses, but, looking at the priority issues of climate and water and biodiversity, would our indicators then be, cleaner water, more protected water, reducing greenhouse gas emissions? So will be carbon neutral. Are these some goals we have in place already that we could look to lean on for some indicators in this area?
Okay. So goals around the current priority issues. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thanks for getting us started on it. That's great. All right, let's go to Melissa Kuski.
This is kind of relevant to that, is just kind of, and it's also kind of a strategy and a success indicator, is just when in these sort of large policy development areas where the EQB is working, making sure that there's sort of clear, tangible, implementable sort of spokes back to the agencies, doing, specific implementation actions based on what comes out of the collective EQB effort.
Okay. So being part of that conversation and having input into those policy discussions.
And yeah, and making sure that the EQB kind of collective work isn't, that the end result isn't simply, a report, that are then kind of tangible, implementable policy outcomes. Getting back to what Commissioner Kessler was talking about, is the individual agencies in their various specific buckets of work in a given environmental issue, be it water or anything else, is that there's something that specifically comes out of the collective EQB conversation and policy development that then gets implemented by the individual agencies.
Okay. Thank you.
And can I just build on what Melissa just said? Because I'm really struggling with this one because I think it's really big and really hard. And I think especially if we're trying to, have diverse voices and outstate voices and people who aren't usually included in these government agency-led efforts that are having a hard enough time being connected through this EQB forum, how will we make sure that the diverse, outstate, underrepresented voices are not only showing up at EQB and are a part of the process, but then carry it a little further, all of the policies that are going to be enacted, how are they going to see themselves in that? And how is the disconnected agency work that is informed and connected through the EQB going to be reflective of this new, more equitable EQB inclusive process?
Yeah, it's a heavy lift. More than a heavy lift. Yeah. Okay. Dan Katzenberger.
Yeah, I think following up on what everyone's saying around this is coming from the corporate standpoint, a big part of the sustainability work is being able to tell the story of the work that you've done, right? And I think maybe that's what we're asking here is we're doing all this innovative work, things are getting done, but how are we telling the story both within the EQB and all the folks that are part of that, but the broader policy, community, and then the broader state community, right? So what has EQB done that's affected climate policy? What has EQB done that's affected biodiversity? And how do we tell those stories? And maybe there's just a different way to do that so that we can communicate better what's already happening. And then once we do that, then we'll be able to identify the gaps where things aren't happening that we think maybe they should be.
Kind of that value of storytelling and the power in storytelling, and are we using that as a resource? Yeah. Okay. All right, let's jump over to strategies. So what could we do in this arena? What action could we take in the next 12 months to move this forward? So we know we're doing well as the convener. We know that we've got some goals around the priority issues. There's some talk about storytelling. Joseph Bauerkamper, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So again, I think in the draft that Catherine put together, there's some things that are maybe just abstract verbal articulations of current reality, but I think we should actually do them. So we can convene more intra-agency teams and work groups, and we can have more deliberate conversations about what are problems or opportunities of interdepartmental concern, and we can be deliberate in identifying opportunities to serve in that convening interagency, public government partnership mode. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So kind of more of what the EQB does and setting up conversations. Maybe it's not part of a meeting, but it's set up as a conversation. Identifying those opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as we did our it wasn't SWOT, but whatever the acronym was,
Yeah.
We identified this area as a weakness where we're not doing a lot of work. And I think that things like environmental review, there's a whole necessary momentum and an obligation to tend to that. Whereas, the statute says that we're supposed to be talking about interdepartmental concerns and studying things, but there's not a kind of apparatus or pressure that compels us to do that consistently. And so we might create that for ourselves, or we might be more deliberate in serving as that for interagency or interdepartmental concerns or opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Anyone like to build off of that or add more to that or add to that?
This is Dan. I guess I would just
Yeah.
add, we've identified equity at the very early part of this as being kind of a risk. We're kind of charging ourselves with doing equity work, even though we don't have policy support for that necessarily. So maybe there's something that has to be done in order to develop policy around environmental equity that doesn't exist yet. So maybe we need to help the legislators provide the framework that gives us the mandate to do the work we're saying we think we need to be doing. If that
Okay.
makes sense.
Thanks, Dan. Riley Hintz, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'm not really sure I understand the last comment, because I think EQB does public engagement, and so I don't know what additional authority is required to just do it a little differently. So maybe I'm just looking for clarification, because I feel like there's some things that could be started right away that would be really helpful in building outcomes that we probably could just implement. So maybe just.
I'm kind of coming from the standpoint of, just for example, like there's a certain political pressure nationally to push back against ESG efforts, right? And I think that same thing can happen with equity. Like, why would we separate a specific community? Shouldn't everything be applied equally to everyone, right? And then if we're coming in with an equity lens, think of college admissions and things like that. There are groups of people that are fighting against equity in college admissions. That same threat happens in environmental conversations as well. So do we need some kind of policy to help us frame our conversations around equity and environment? Or do we need to bring diverse voices in, both marginalized communities, but also, outstate folks or whatever that might have different opinions on that? I guess I'm just saying that there's a risk there that I think policy could help to alleviate. Maybe.
Okay. Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I don't want to disrupt that important conversation there. I do feel that that we already have an obligation to do a much better job of amplifying and engaging voices that we're not engaging or amplifying adequately now. And though I do think while it may not need to come from the legislature or some other external entity as a charge to us, I do think that we need to continue to work at doing a better job of articulating our own policy, our own operational protocols, especially surrounding equity. You know, this continues to be, right, even while it's a different outcome that we haven't gotten to yet, it's prevalent in all of these conversations. And I feel like we're keeping it at an arm's length in an awkward way right now, and keeping it abstract. So I think that we need to, as the EQB, pursue our own innovative. Maybe it's the small p policy that Commissioner Daubenberger mentioned earlier. But we need to be innovative in regard to how we're understanding that, how we're understanding all of what we do, but particularly the equity and engagement piece. And to develop policies like tribal consultation policy that folks are working on in order to work toward that.
Okay. All right, we're at 3 o'clock. I'd like to keep us moving if we feel like we have covered this priority outcome. And let's take a look at number 3. And this one is the EQB maintains and improves Minnesota's environmental review program. So I know in our situation analysis, we had what we're doing well, and environmental review came up a number of times. So what is the current reality for this priority outcome? Maintaining and improving it upon what we're already doing well. Trina Kessler, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think this one is easier. I think the reality is that the EQB kind of hosts a very efficient structure of interagency technical experts who coordinate well together.
Great. Okay.
I think that's kind of the internal facing one. I think that others could probably speak to how it's working externally.
Okay, great question. Yeah, how is it working externally? What's the current reality of how it's working externally? Can anyone speak to that? Or who can speak to that? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
I mean, I don't know how well I can speak to externally, but there's certainly, I think Katrina is correct. It's an efficient structure of interagency technical experts who coordinate well together. But I think we heard earlier in the meeting, there are complaints about the efficiency of the environmental review program, the speed of the environmental review program. And then to turn back internally, I would also note that we've got a great team. It's going pretty well, but there's still a lot of work to do. And I don't think that anyone feels like we're over-resourced in that capacity, right? In terms of the tech reps in particular, who kind of have to come together and help advise and expand and improve on guidance and updates to the program. So I think that's the reality, is we're doing good work, but there's still a ton of it, and that has to get done. eventually.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks, Melissa. Other thoughts on the current reality of the environmental review program? Ken Foster, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one would be, not just, it's related to public, the public in communities where reviews being undertaken usually doesn't understand environmental review and is not engaged, but when they are, it's usually because they have a problem with something that's happening. And so then it leads to kind of a distrust of it. So I think one of the current realities is that people don't necessarily have trust in the process, or, and so, and partly because they don't know about it unless there's something they don't like, but then there's just a general, I think, idea that, we don't know if these are being conducted appropriately. I mean, it's kind of thing where externally on all sides, people tend to be dissatisfied, and so the Chamber of Commerce thinks it's too much being done, and other residents of places might think that it's not rigorous enough.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
So I just wanted to say, I see what you wrote. There's no evidence that people don't have trust in the program. There's just a question about, do people know it, and, to what extent do they see it as legitimate and, rigorous?
Do people see it as legitimate and rigorous if we add that? Okay.
Yeah, I think just it's more of a question that we don't really know.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks for that.
Can we just add to that? Like, I think legitimate and rigorous are excellent questions, but I would also say overly onerous, because I'm just saying all ends of the spectrum. Some people are saying it is way too much, and others are saying it is not transparent enough, it is not inclusive enough. And so I'm not advocating for one end of the spectrum or the other. I just want to make sure that if these are the voices that are likely trying to characterize the existing reality, we should try to capture all sides.
Yeah, and that there's a polarity there of a both and. Both it is rigorous and does require a lot, and less so, right? So Catherine, I saw that you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to just share with everyone and remind them, we do have that continuous improvement work that we did. And I think in part of that, we did hear from people, what's going well, what's not going well, and from local governments, particularly who are RGUs, are concerns about how, I think there are some thoughts about how do local governments do this, and what support and capacity and things do they have as well. So just putting that into the space, and also letting you know that, as we're working through strategies for this, I'll be looking at that continuous improvement feedback as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Catherine. So let's jump over. Ken, is your hand up, or is that from prior?
From before.
Okay.
Put it away.
All right, thanks. All right, so ready to hear from folks on success indicators. So what will be different in 2 to 3 years if you really mobilize behind this priority outcome? So looking at the current reality, and the way this is written is that it's maintenance and improvement. So so what would you see in place? What would you like to see in place in 2 to 3 years if this is a 5-year strategic plan? What would start to move? Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Something that comes to mind would be, let's see, in 2 or 3 years, we would have better equipped RGUs, especially when those RGUs are not state agencies, but sure, y'all can be better equipped too. But better equipped RGUs. And this goes back to something Nick Martin mentioned earlier about providing tools and resources for the environmental review process.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And a better equipped RGU would enable what? Let's just add on to that a second. And I see other hands going up, but a better equipped RGU
Would enable a more effective and consistent and efficient environmental review process.
Okay. All right. Melissa Kuski.
Just to kind of build on from that too, I think the clearer, the more kind of advanced, improved program, I think it leads to better projects overall that are more environmentally friendly and consistent with sustainable development in the state.
Okay. So better projects that result from environmental review having been done. Is that correct?
Yes, and also even just knowing what's expected in the environmental review process typically tends to lead to, you know, better project design that comes into the environmental review project.
Okay. Catch up there. And Katrina Kessler.
Yeah, I think that one thing that could be a indicator of success is how many resources are available for the public and regulated parties to interact with us electronically and with dashboards and real-time data. Because I think that, true or not, there's a criticism that is like a black hole and that we don't know how long things are going to take or what was the basis of things that were decided and how the project moved through the process. And I think the more that we can show people that we're trying to engage with on all sides, here is to get to Melissa's point, like, here's the process you can expect to move through. Here's how others moved through the process. Here are the data that support the decisions that were made in this case that is similar or dissimilar to the thing that you are proposing. So it's kind of like interacting with people in a 21st century way that it brings people into the process and like promotes engagement and trust.
Okay. All right. And let's go to Nancy.
Thanks. I'd also like to build on what Melissa was talking about with better projects being an outcome. And I'm thinking just maybe a little more specifically, but having the knowledge of project proposers or agencies having the knowledge, information about what is out there so they can avoid environmental impacts or of course minimize, but also good mitigation strategies that could be emerging if we were thinking in the next 2 to 3 years. Are there mitigation strategies that are going to be some best practices? I think would be good to have too.
So how do we make that available and visible?
Right, yeah. How do we spur that innovation, and then how do we capture it as a best practice?
Okay. So that and I think on the above one, I think we also want to mention on the above bullet point, we want to mention data. So bringing people into the process with data that promotes engagement and trust. Okay. All right, we're doing great. So let's look at the gap then and say between the current reality and success indicators, what are some strategies, some specific and concrete ways to start moving this forward in the next 12 months? So we've got the continuous improvement project that's going. You know, are there existing data sources? Is the process online now? What are things that, is there a dashboard available online? Is that something that would need to be developed? So are there things that need to be developed or things that are already in play that need to be leveraged? And I know we're getting tired, but we're getting there. So thank you. So who's going to call out the first strategy for environmental review? You know, and I think that's, yeah, go ahead, Nancy, thank you.
Well, I'm going to admit that I'm looking at some of the things that Catherine already suggested as potential strategies. So, you know, I'm just going to call out, maybe lift up the technical assistance and guidance that EQB provides, and what more in that area can be provided. How do we advance that, you know, especially as we're moving forward with environmental review, improvements to environmental review? What additionally can we be providing some of those resources?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm just looking here. Convening interagency teams and work groups to share best practices, identify barriers, and develop innovative solutions. And we talked about convening in the last outcome around that too. So what other strategies, either looking through those example areas of work, or what comes to mind when you think about what's the gap that needs to be filled here from where we want to be to where we are today?
Well, in addition to what you've already said, maybe you could have training. If it's better equipped and you know, partners in RGUs, you could have training for people who are serving as RGUs, and also just have training on like what is environmental review for people who have projects proposed in their area. I'm thinking back to, you know, if you have a project in a specific county, like invite the county to invite other people into this is what environmental review is. This is the role. This is how we want people to see themselves in it.
Okay, so more in that outreach and making information available. Melissa Kuski, go ahead.
I think there's just sort of a need to, I mean, there's like I said, we've seen previously, there's a lot of work to be done. But then in terms of kind of tackling the stickiest, the most challenging, kind of toothsome issues, I think it's going to be really important for the board to sort of put those out there. And if it's, you know, talking about health in environmental review, health impact statements, or, you know, like the feedlot form, or, you know, like there's a lot of like really toothsome issues that are going to be part of this updating guidance, updating, you know, the environmental review program. And I think it's or even, you know, the criteria and rules and things like that. I think it's just those are going to have to be things too, as the program gets refined, that they're going to be hard, and that's not going to be quick. But that's just sort of the reality of what may stand between us and kind of those outcomes.
Okay. Nick Martin.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to the process where we added the climate questions, greenhouse gas footprinting and climate impacts questions to the EAW, and how EQB provided certain tools and guidance, and like how at the beginning of the process there was this sense of like, oh, we don't know how much work this is going to take. We assume it's going to be costly and burdensome, and then I think that through the process, we learned that both from the RGUs and maybe even the proposers, it wasn't quite as bad as people feared, because like it became better known, like there were tools being provided like there was added work. I don't mean to minimize that. There is added work to answer those questions, but if there's clear guidance to do so, then it's helpful to the RGUs and it's helpful to the project proposers and their consultants. So that's important, but I think that I remember us talking about also how there still isn't a lot of prescriptive guidance. It's sort of like a buffet. It's like, here's half a dozen tools you could use to develop your greenhouse gas footprint, but you don't really know which one is like good enough versus others that maybe like are much better but take more time to use or something. So I just wonder if we could think, and I'm not saying this would apply only to the climate questions, if we could think in terms of like, where can EQB help the proposers and the RGUs with prescriptive guidance that's kind of like, if you do it this way, if you use this tool, that'll be good enough. If you want to put in more time and get a more robust estimate that might actually be fairer to your project because it takes into consideration the specifics of your project, you can do that, but like what's gonna be good enough to get you through the process. So
Okay.
yeah, I guess tools in general, but then specifically the idea of, looking for where we can shift from just like providing a buffet to like providing some prescriptive guidance, if
Okay.
that's possible. And I know sometimes it won't be possible, but.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. So provide certain tools and clear prescriptive guidance, not just a buffet of options. Just want to add that with EQB's help. Okay. All right, it's time to move to number 4. Thank you for those contributions here. And now, this one, the EQB works towards achieving environmental quality without disproportionate impacts. And I know this is a big one. This is a big one for you all, and that it was really like, let's call this out bigger than our values, not just list equity as a value, but put it as an active priority outcome that we want to take specific actions to manage, to go into this space more fully. So what is the current reality around this priority outcome? And this one's new. So where are you at?
Well, I'll invite others to say otherwise, but I don't know that we have a good way to understand currently if we are achieving environmental quality without disproportionate impacts. We aren't measuring it, we aren't asking about it. And so I think that's where I would characterize the current reality. And I think, just to jump ahead, success indicator would be a way to actually measure whether or not that is happening.
Okay, let's jump over there and add it. Thank you, Carrie. And thanks, Katrina. Okay, Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So, so for this particular outcome, I think it might be helpful if at some point we talked more about it. I think that the outcome itself is probably in its own developmental stage. And when I first read it, and I'm grateful to have in the packet the what does this mean explanation of it. But if we just take the outcome itself, it sounds to me like the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce Foundation might feel that we're working toward environmental quality and having a disproportionate impact on economic development, or on a disproportionate impact on certain industries or something. And so the clarifying paragraph in the packet gestures toward what I think we're probably talking about here, but I feel like we should just say it, though I don't know that we're on the same page about whatever that it might be. So I think we have an opportunity to deliberate this outcome in ways that may be more necessary. It may not be necessary for some of the other outcomes, but might be helpful here if not necessary. Thanks.
And so, Joseph, do you mind if we jump and put that as a strategy to deliberate this outcome as a board?
Yeah,
Like there's more conversation, because the current reality, what I heard you.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing to do. I don't think it's a strategy that's going to achieve a measurable improvement on this matter, but I think it's probably necessary step that we might imagine we already took that I don't think we did.
Yeah, let's put that in parentheses, a necessary step, not necessarily a strategy, but at least so we have it. And it sounds like the current reality is that this outcome is in the development stage.
That would be my understanding, but I could well be out of the loop on that matter.
But your opinion matters, and so if that's how you're seeing it, then that's the current reality to you. So let's hear from others. Hands are going up. Thanks, Joseph. So Dan Katzenberg.
Am I off mute here? Yeah. I wanted to go, for the current reality, I think the first comment was that we don't have a good way to understand if we're achieving it. If you go to EPA's Environmental Justice Screening and Mapping Tool, I mean, we can literally see where there are disproportionate impacts by neighborhood on any number of environmental issues. And so I think the current reality is there is disproportionate impacts on environmental matters based on geography. I mean, that's just kind of a fact. I would think we could just state that. And then the success indicators would be to have that environmental justice screening mapping tool change over time to where there are not disproportionate impacts. So that's where I would kind of start that conversation.
Okay.
Can I just add to what Dan just said? Because I don't disagree at all. And I think that Joseph captured this. Like, we know where the environmental justice areas in the state are, and we have data that show what communities are experiencing, but to tie that to specific environmental review decisions is not currently something that is in place. And to measure that against individual environmental review decisions doesn't exist right now.
So that third point, it's not tied to the environmental review. So we know where they are, but they're not tied.
I don't think it is, but other people could jump in.
Ken, do you have a comment to build on this, or do you have a separate, different comment?
Yeah, on the same thing. Going back to what Joseph said, that, yeah, I mean, I think it is a totally new thing. In my time on the board, I have never heard us talk about this. And we've talked about the need to promote equity, but this is a specific thing about you're doing certain things, trying to achieve environmental quality and trying to understand the impacts and are they disproportionate. So I do think that if this is a I mean, I would hope that as we do an outcome in the future like this, it would specify what kind of disproportionate impact, or maybe we do want to leave it as just open, because as was mentioned, it could be all sorts of things. So to cut to the quick, I guess I agree that the current reality is that we don't think about this. We don't have a way to really think about it as a board right now. And a strategy would be, something akin to what's already written there, for us to decide, what does this mean for us, and what is within our hypothetical capacity to do. As Katrina was mentioning, all of these environmental impact statements that are done, I mean, do we have the capacity to measure the outcome of those in terms of disproportionate impact? So this, in the short term anyway, I think this would require a lot of work to understand what we mean and what we're aiming for here.
Yeah. So Carrie, can you add that third bullet point? Can you add that to strategies? I think that was Ken's intent. So as a board, what does this mean for us? What is it within our capacity to do in this arena? Okay. All right. Catherine, please go ahead.
I mostly I want to ask a question, because I think right now, yes, this outcome is in development, and it's something that I wrote based on, the conversations you all had, and took really from sort of this general conception of what is environmental justice, and it's everybody has a chance to be meaningfully involved. And I think in my work, I think I've seen that we've all grasped that. Like, we've all grasped the concept of all, people who are impacted by projects, diversity of people being able to be meaningfully involved in decision. But the second component of the environmental justice is, and basically no one experiences disproportionate impacts to their health or their environment based on where they live, or their zip code, their class, whether they're BIPOC. And so, but that part is hard, and in ways of trying to find metrics and ways to say, is disproportionate impact actually occurring? To Dan's point, there's maps and things like that, but really teasing that out. And so that's why I kind of wrote it. That's why I chose the word disproportionate impact. And as we were talking about how to explain it, I really want to thank Priscilla for helping me parse this out, because it's very tied. They're all very tied together. And so thinking about the conversations, and that part being about the meaningful involvement, and then like the equity part being about trying to understand that disproportionate impact. So that's why I put those words are. And I think my question to the board, in terms of this is a measure that's in development, is sort of, will you be comfortable with those words, and then some strategies that are to develop the concept further, or do we need more comfort on the words, in the next few months before we put them into the plan? And so I wasn't clear, Kim, when you sort of said this is an outcome in development, sort of where we are, how we're feeling about that part. And I will also say, if there are things, I think there still remains the potential of an approach of saying, well, if one of the things we want to do is improve how environmental review shows disproportionate impacts, or improve how environmental review meaningfully involves people, like those are strategies that could certainly go into the environmental review outcome as well to meet the equity value. So that remains an option for you all to consider.
Thanks, Catherine, for clarifying. So did you have a question? Did you have a question in there that you want to hear a response from the group?
I guess my question was sort of how, how strongly do you feel about the words and like, how do you feel about this idea of putting it out as an outcome, even if it's one where the first strategy is figuring out what this outcome actually means to us? Do we feel comfortable with that? I mean, I intend to take all your input and bring this back to you. You'll have more chances to weigh in, but curious about how you feel about that in development idea.
Okay. So Melissa Kuski, do you want to start us off with the response to that?
Sure, but keep in mind I'm a proxy and I'm treading lightly in terms of the comfort level. I would say just as a general premise, I really support this being its own outcome, and support it, and recognizing that even though it is still an outcome in progress, and that's part of the outcome itself is identifying the outcome. I think that it's important enough, and it's sort of undercovered enough elsewhere in everywhere in government that it there's value in it being its own standalone thing. I would also note that it is tied to some of the other, it's tied to all of the other outcomes in some way. There are environmental review elements, right, in terms of how a project may cause disproportionate, looking at that sort of analysis of disproportionate impacts in a project. There is also a policy sort of development frame aspect of this, and coming together on sort of emerging issues and greater policy development in terms of looking broadly at sort of existing disproportionate health outcomes and what the state might, like how to explore those, because there's a whole lot of historical inequity and historical disproportionate outcomes that environmental review on its own is a forward-looking thing. And so that's not just going to cover this. And so there's a policy aspect, there's an environmental review aspect, there's obviously bringing Minnesotans together in conversations aspect of who gets to come to the table and how do we bring them to the table and provide them, equal voice. But it's also sort of its own thing. And so I am supportive of the language and the outcome, even knowing, we kind of have to flesh it out as we go.
Thank you, Melissa. And next we have Ken. What's your perspective, Ken? And the phones are lighting up, so we'll get to the other hands. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think probably what Melissa, what I heard her saying was that, I mean, when I think about equity, there's an input and process part of it where do you have diverse people participating? Is there equitable opportunities to participate and be involved with the process meaningfully? And then there's the outcome part. And so this one is focusing on the outcome, which I haven't thought as much about in the context of what we're doing. I think if this is, the outcome is more difficult to measure and to achieve, ensuring that there are not disproportionate impacts. I would be comfortable having this here as I think it's a really ambitious kind of thing to have there, but it's important. I'd be fine with having it there with the idea that the first year, I mean, our strategy is to figure out how we can enter into this space. The last thing I would say is that if we do have it in here, it seems like, I mean, it's all very tricky, but it seems like it would be useful to have, without disproportionate impacts based on geographical, racial, that kind of thing, so that it's clear about what this is about.
Okay. Thanks, Ken, for those thoughts. Let's go to Nancy.
Thank you. Yeah, and on the strategy, and as Ken was just talking about too, with what we need to understand as a board, and possibly a strategy for that could be whatever development we can do for ourselves as board members in this area. Exactly what are we talking about with disproportionate impacts? How should we be thinking about that in ways that maybe we haven't been so far? And another thing I don't want to lose sight of when I think about disproportionate impacts is cumulative effects. So communities who've been impacted have had environmental impacts from projects or development over the years, but then as we're moving more toward environmental quality, are we ensuring we're not doing things that would, ultimately impact or affect a neighborhood who's already, or community who's already had past environmental impacts. So the cumulative effects need to be understood too. And I think that this is a space we board members could probably further our own development in this area as we're thinking about what this means and what are the outcomes for this sort of priority.
So I think I heard from you and the last speaker, if we add a strategy of clarity about the scope of disproportionate impacts we're talking about. Is that correct? So, because there's disproportionate impacts in economic or neighborhood or racial or cumulative impacts. So the clarity of the scope that we're talking here.
Yeah, scope and understanding. Yeah.
Okay, let's add that then, scope and understanding. Thank you. All right, let's go to Joseph.
Yeah, thanks. So this won't, for better and worse, won't add anything to your chart here, but I just want to make clear that I happen to be a strong supporter of this outcome or an articulation of something like it. And I also want to get on board or join what Commissioner Daubenberger has said about cumulative impacts or cumulative effects, which are an important and sophisticated way to think about disproportionate impacts. And then for me, the anxiety I have about this outcome is maybe pretty simple and relates to what Ken said about wanting a few more words here. And I don't know of an elegant way to articulate it, but to say more clearly what the reference is to when we say disproportionate impacts on, right? What places, what populations, what communities are we talking about? And I think if someone could come up with an elegant way to articulate that, it would help me, and I think it would help our process quite a bit. Thanks.
So Carrie, thank you. So let's just put in parentheses there, i.e. communities, comma, locations. Okay, thank you. All right, and then let's go to Dan Katzenberg.
Yep, that's fine. Either one's fine. I would like to reflect the previous comment that I'm 100% behind this as well. I think this is very important, and I think we need to keep it. I do think it needs some possible wordsmithing to get us on track. And so to that end, I have a couple suggestions. One, where it says the EQB, this is the actual title of it, works towards achieving environmental quality. Maybe it's aspires towards at this point, right? We're just figuring this out. It's an aspirational goal. We've not been mandated by any legislative body to do this. We're taking this on our own because we think it's important to do. And then in terms of what kind of disproportionate impacts, one idea could just be disproportionate health impacts. I mean, we could just make it as simple as that, right? Are we affecting people's health? There's already been mention of increased asthma rates by certain kinds of industrial processes and things like that. So do we limit it to health impacts? Do we limit it to health and economic impacts? So that's something we can decide later, but that's what I would say about that.
Okay, I just jotted that down, and I'm sure that Catherine's jotting that down as you speak too. So let's move to Joseph, and then let's start thinking about bringing this to a close. So go ahead, Joseph.
Yeah, thanks. Just real quick, and with apologies, Dan, I want to advocate for at least keeping works in here because these are outcomes. And so I don't want the outcome of all of this. I don't want the outcome of EQB's processes and the things we do to be an aspiration. Like, I don't want us to end up achieving the state of having an aspiration. So I feel like works is already enough of a buffer. So because we're talking about outcomes. And so I think we need to get to where the EQB works toward achieving environmental quality without disproportionate impacts on the populations and places that we're concerned about, that we're exceptionally concerned about. So I just want to say that. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to bring the session to a close. the workshop to a close. I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for your energy and participation in this. Thank you for your contributions and really in the dialogue that you've had with each other. So, you know, yes, we're capturing the ideas, and Catherine and team are going to be pulling this together. But I think hearing each other and having the opportunity to have some conversations around these important outcomes as you're setting this roadmap in your direction of where do you want to focus and what do you want to elevate? So on behalf of Carrie and I, thank you. And I'd like to turn it over to Catherine for kind of the last words and next steps.
Well, thank you, Kim and Carrie, and thank you, everybody. Kim's right. I took a bunch of notes, and I suspect this might be a place where I might go back to the recording once or twice. So my goal at this point is to take in this information and talk to the staff and come up with some kind of some concrete strategies that sit between that space of outcomes and the space of sort of work plan items that we can move forward on for the next few years. And I think there's so much here to build on, and I'm excited to do that. And then my plan is to bring that back to you all. I think Kim had a timeline slide at the beginning for kind of a final, like an interim final. This is something that we want to put out and get some public engagement on, because I do want to put this out and use Engagement HQ or use some of our other tools. And I think based on what I heard today, was a little thinking to do about maybe what those tools are, to get some input from people who are not at this meeting and don't come to these meetings, but have ideas about what we should do. So tentatively that is scheduled for May. I think depending on how it goes, it potentially could actually happen a little sooner. So April or May, we'll come back with that kind of a final draft that we're comfortable putting out for public engagement, with the idea of then taking in comments and input and refining with something for a final version, I believe in July, so that we can kind of kick off the next fiscal year with a new strategic plan and build a work plan for fiscal year 25, starting with that space. So that's where I'm at. If you have other thoughts that you want to give me, you can feel free to let me know. I really appreciate the conversation. And again, since there will be more spots to talk about this publicly, we'll have time for that as well. So thank you all.
Great, thank you, Catherine. And I'd also like to thank you, Kim and Carrie, for leading us through this discussion. I know it's a tough discussion when you're talking strategies and indicators and getting the creative juices flowing and everybody. And it is good to have this discussion as a group as we did today, because I think it's good to be able to build off one another and hear others' thoughts on it too. So, but as Catherine said, if any further thoughts come to mind, I know sometimes, like after a long day of meetings, I'll go on a run and suddenly other things will come to my mind, ruminating on what we already talked about. So appreciate Executive Director Nuschler being open to further thoughts on this, but we'll look forward to seeing it kind of come together in that draft strategic plan. So with that brings us to our next agenda item, which is the public comment period. And so today, I think we are going to be, of course, having any public comments, but prioritizing those that are based on the strategic plan discussion. So again, with public comment, please raise your hand in Teams if you would like to comment. We first have Joy Anderson. Go ahead, Joy.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hey, last time it didn't work. Thank you so much for listening to me. I'm Joy Anderson. I'm from Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. And I wanted to respond just briefly to the concern that I've heard multiple times today, and that was expressed in the chamber report about environmental review and permitting taking too long and thus hindering economic development. A couple of things that I'd like to point out with respect to that. Sometimes part of the long permitting processes is due to the actions of the business itself by pushing back against items that are in the permit, by challenging their permits. One permit that's cited as taking a particularly long time is the US Steel Mintac permit, and that's because US Steel brought a lawsuit against that permit. So that's not the fault of the environmental review process. That's the choice that Mintac made to oppose that permit. Another thing is that agencies don't feel that they can say no to permits. Permitting time would take less time if agencies were able to cut it off and say, no, this is a bad project. It's not going to meet our permitting. It's not going to meet our permitting standards. We're not going to get there. But instead, agencies keep coming back to businesses and saying, we can fix this, we can fix this, we can fix this. And that takes time because people want to get to yes. And finally, trying to shorten the environmental review process is not the answer. I think we all know about the example of the Huber OSB plant that was proposed for, was that last year, 2 years ago? And they tried to avoid environmental review by going to the legislature and saying we shouldn't have to do environmental review. And then because they tried to get out of doing the longer EIS, the shorter environmental assessment worksheet that was done was found to be not sufficient by the Minnesota Court of Appeals. And in the end, if they had just done an EIS at the beginning, it probably would have taken them less time than the fact that they had to do 2 different EIWs and go to the Minnesota Court of Appeals. So I just want to respond to that issue. Yes, environmental review takes time, but that's not always because, as the chamber sometimes suggests, that it's environmental people pushing back and against good projects that should make it through the permitting process quickly. Environmental review just takes time. Permitting takes time. We need to do these things so that we have good economic development projects in Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Do we have any other commenters for public comment today? Go ahead and raise your hand here in Teams. I'm not seeing any others. Edie Nuschler, are you seeing any other hands up or know of anyone else?
I don't see any, Madam Chair.
Great. Well, again, thank you for that comment. And that brings us to the closing of our meeting today. Again, I want to just thank everybody for the discussions today. Really good discussion around the strategic plan. And thank you all for your time and thoughtful consideration that you gave to it too. Really appreciate that participation. And we have reached the end of our agenda. So with that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
This is Commissioner Arnold, I'll move.
Thank you, Commissioner Arnold. Is there a second?
Dan Katzenberger will second.
Thank you. And Edie Nuschler, are we okay with the voice, just all voice vote for this? Thank you. All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
No nays, no opposition. The motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you again, everybody.